All right, thank you, Jason. My apologies. I was looking for my mute button there. So, hello everyone. My name is Dawn Brown, and I am going to be presenting or kind of doing an introduction for our team. The Crime Victim Services Committee is formed to promote and develop the Crime Victim Services programs for North Carolina. And today we'll discuss our two funding sources that include the Violence Against Women Act and the Victim of Crimes Act. And I want us to briefly introduce ourselves to everyone. Again, my name is Dawn Brown. I'm the lead VAWA planner at the Governor's Crime Commission. And I will start with our supervisor, Adonica.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I had to run down to Grace's office. I'm Adonica McAllister, and I supervise the Crime Victim Services team as well as the Juvenile Justice team.
Thanks, Adonica. Lindsay?
Good afternoon now. Again, to everybody, I am Lindsay Bohan, the lead VOCA planner under the Crime Victim Services team.
Awesome. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. My name is Amanda Endicott. I am on the VAWA team as a planner as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Jordan?
Hi, everyone. I am Jordan. I am one of the VOCA planners.
Thanks, Jordan. Patricia?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia Albert, and I'm a VOCA planner.
All right. Thank you, Patricia. And Grace?
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'm a program assistant for the planning team.
Thank you, everyone. And we can move on to the next slide. All right, so again, my name is Dawn Brown Harrison. I'm the lead VAWA planner on the Crime Victim Services team at the Governor's Crime Commission, and I'll be presenting on our VAWA funding source for the Violence Against Women Act. We appreciate the time you're spending with us today, and we look forward to your questions to ensure that you understand and have the information that you'll need to apply for the VAWA funding. Okay, so the GCC currently administers two sources of VAWA funding, which include the Sexual Assault Services Formula Grant Program and the Stop Violence Against Women Formula Grant Program. The Sexual Assault Services Program is administered through our Sexual Assault Coalition. So they put together a solicitation and do a competitive grant application to sexual assault organizations on a separate funding cycle. And then our STOP funds are administered through the Governor's Crime Commission on a competitive grant cycle. And those funds are awarded to states and territories to enhance the capacity of local communities to develop and strengthen effective law enforcement and prosecution strategies to combat violence against women and to develop and strengthen victim services in cases involving violent crimes against women. Next slide. To provide a brief background, the VAWA Stop Formula Grant Program supports communities and was designed to improve the criminal justice system's response to adult, youth, and child victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking by forming partnerships between state and local communities. We have provided the following links below so that you can explore additional information about the VAWA Stop Grant Program. As we go through the application overview, I want to remind everyone that it's very, very, very important to read and review the entire RFA. I know you've heard this already so far through the workshop, but most of the information that you're going to get today is going to be documented in your RFA. So it's very important that you read and probably reread the RFA to ensure that you are clear about the information and requirements. We do get a very high volume of calls around this time between the workshop and the application period with a lot of your questions, and we do appreciate it. All the questions that you email, put in the chat, or call us with, we appreciate those, and we are looking forward to developing the FAQs for you all to be able to refer to those questions. But a lot of the answers to those questions are going to be found in the RFA most of the time. Our team is here to guide you, and we want you to call us based on the amount of time. We want you to call us, but based on the amount of time it takes us to get back to you during this time, we want you to make sure that you read and understand the RFA front to back. And this will ensure that you have as much information as possible regarding the program and requirements. The STOP program aims to improve the criminal justice system's response to violent crimes against women by encouraging the development and strengthening of effective law enforcement, prosecution strategies, and victim services in cases involving violent crimes against women. The VAWA program does not exclude men. Okay, next slide. The GCC encourages programs that involve partnerships, collaborations, and best practices that, one, support victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking by ensuring that the stigma of reporting is no longer a barrier for victims. Two, we encourage projects that provide resources for training and help law enforcement enforce better understanding for victims, and ultimately reduce any stigma around reporting. And lastly, we want projects that utilize best practices and/or evidence-based interventions. Next slide. For STOP funding, we focus on cases involving domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Human trafficking victims who have been sexually assaulted or battered by an intimate partner can also be served with STOP funds. For your application, the first thing you will need to do is select a priority service area. Our service areas consist of victim services, law enforcement, prosecutors, state and local courts, and discretionary. In our discretionary category, we fund domestic violence intervention programs and prevention programs. Next slide. All right, the next thing you'll need to do is identify if your project has a focus area of sexual assault or if your organization is culturally specific. If you select sexual assault as a focus area, your project must have a sole and legitimate focus on sexual assault. So the service will need to address sexual assault only. If you select culturally specific as a focus area, your organization must be an entity that serves a particular cultural community, race or ethnic minorities, and the organization is founded, led, and staffed by members of the community. So the program itself was created by and for the community that the project serves, addressing challenges that mainstream services may not fully understand and building trust through cultural competency. All right, next slide. Next, you will need to identify at least one purpose area for your project. The GCC has identified 13 purpose areas that align with the state of North Carolina's VAWA implementation plan and resolve some of the funding and service gaps for our state. The purpose areas are specific categories where funds can be used, focusing on services, training, officers, and prosecutors to combat violent crimes against women. So you will find in your RFA a page that shows you all 13 of the purpose areas. You can read through those. I kind of put some examples on the screen here just to show you a similar view of what the page might look like, but there are 13 purpose areas and they're labeled A through M in the RFA. You'll need to choose at least one, but you can select more than one. All right, next slide. So reading and reviewing the RFA STOP implementation plan and the RFA are a very important part of your application. So the STOP implementation plan is important because you can use it to assist you with selecting your purpose areas. And completing your application will ensure completing the application with the STOP implementation plan nearby will ensure that your application aligns with strategies described in the plan that outline how the state will use STOP funds to meet these purpose areas. So this is the part when you start to get ready to select your purpose areas, you want to go and grab this STOP implementation plan. This plan was developed by the GCC in collaboration with North Carolina partners and stakeholders that form the STOP Implementation Plan Advisory Group. This plan is updated every 3 years and can be found on our website. And I kind of gave you a picture here that also has a link to show you where you can find that information. If anyone's ever received an email from me, you also can find that link in my signature line. So STOP implementation plan, purpose areas go hand in hand. And if you have any questions about that implementation plan, we encourage you to contact us. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we will go over our STOP priorities. After you've done those first 3 important steps, you'll then get to the point where you'll need to select the priority area to which you will apply. So we have state and local courts. We administer 5% of our award to state and local courts. And this is a non-competitive category, and the designated agency who applies here understands who they are and their application cost caps. And so the application is scheduled to go from 1 to 3 years for the state and local court priority. In this priority, the funds are allocated to support courts and their continued effort to ensure access to legal remedies and protections for victims and to strengthen the court's collaborative role in enhancing community safety. All right, next slide. Our next priority is that of victim services. We allocate 35% of our entire award to this category. The funding cap is typically $200,000, and the length of award will be 1 to 3 years. This funding priority is designed to support a range of services directly to victims that assist them and their families in navigating the criminal justice system and aftermath of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And we've provided some examples here as well. here and also in the RFA. You'll be able to refer to those examples. Okay, next slide. Law enforcement is our next category where we allocate 25%. There are several options for this priority. For direct services, you may have less than 2 full-time staff, and that's a specific priority where you'll apply under law enforcement. There's also a category where you'll have 2 or more staff, and you're able to apply in that category as well. For these direct services priorities under law enforcement, there are caps associated, so be sure to pay attention to any caps that are associated with the priorities you're selecting. Law enforcement also prioritizes training for frontline staff. And so there's a regional category as well as a statewide category, and both of those categories have caps that you'll need to pay attention to. Then law enforcement is also prioritizing domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction, and applications are capped at 100,000 in that category. We are asking applicants to review and ask whatever questions you may have about the domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction category under law enforcement, because we are encouraging applicants in that direction as well. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Those applications are scheduled to go 1 to 3 years as well, and 1 application per applicant can be submitted under this priority. All right, next slide is our prosecution category that is also allocated at 25% of our entire award. And similarly to law enforcement, there's a direct services category with caps. There's training of frontline staff. And there is domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction. So that category also goes for 1 to 3 years, and 1 application, or we're asking that you submit 1 application per organization under this category. Our last category would be discretionary, and we are allocating 10% of our entire award here. In discretionary, we typically see applications from domestic violence intervention programs, and they are serving individual or regional populations, and there are caps associated with both of those population or both of those categories under discretionary. And then we are prioritizing prevention and emerging issues, as well under discretionary. Prevention, we are allocating 5%, up to 5% of our award to prevention projects. And then the emerging issues would be that of domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction. So we do have 3 places where applicants can participate in the emerging issue of domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction. And again, if there are questions related to that category, we are happy to take those calls and answer. Under the discretionary category with those activities I mentioned, domestic violence intervention and prevention, the length of award is going to be 1 to 3 years. Agencies requesting funding for a regional domestic violence intervention project are required to submit a letter from the NC Council for Women supporting the justification for expanded multi-region projects. And we will talk a little bit more about required documentation later on in the presentation. Okay, so another area of the application that I wanted to touch on, and again, you see the little image of a person holding a book, or we'll say the application. I threw those pictures in just to remind you to read. Pick up your RFA while you're completing your application in EBS. It will be very helpful to you. One of the pages you are going to need to identify is the funding priority crosswalk. So all the priorities we just discussed, here you'll have a list of 15 places where you can enter those applications. So it's 15, which means you need to be very careful and sure about the category in which you're applying. If you make a mistake, you can call us and let us know. We will support you in getting everything corrected. But we want to, set you up for success. And as to not delay anything that you need to submit or delay your application process. So you want to make sure that you are familiar with each of the priorities and that you select the correct priority using the crosswalk. I will use as example 3 of our priorities. I will say the 4th one down in law enforcement is domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction. So it's there alone, and there should be no applications in that category unless they are focused on domestic violence, firearm, homicide reduction. And so that's an example of how you can use the crosswalk to support you with selecting the correct priority. Also at the very bottom, you see victim services, nonprofit. So if you are a victim services provider, but you're a state or government organization, you want to make sure that you don't select the victim services nonprofit, but you select the victim services state government organization priority, which is right above that one. So get to know these. And again, pick up the phone, send us an email if you have any questions. All right, so next slide. Thank you, Grace. This next slide, I'm not going to go deep into this, but unallowable uses are out of scope activities are costs and activities that cannot be charged to the grant and cannot be reimbursed. So we want you to review the RFA information regarding specific activities and costs that are covered by the grant, as well as those that are not covered by the grant. In July 2025, the Office on Violence Against Women announced new grant conditions for out-of-scope activities. Enforcement of several of these conditions is currently paused by a federal court order. These state restrictions include restrictions on services for undocumented immigrants, promoting gender ideology, excluding systematic issues, restrictions on law enforcement, and collaboration. So as Caroline discussed during the welcome at the beginning of this workshop, please be sure to review the guidelines for the funding sources that you're applying to and ask questions so that you get the clarification that you need to move forward with your funding requests. The GCC leadership will continue to monitor these federal updates and communicate with our subrecipients as received. Next slide, Grace. Okay, you will need to pay close attention to any specific documentation that may be required with your application. For example, all victim services applications need to submit confidentiality assurances. All culturally specific applicants would need to make sure that they submit a form that it says culturally specific organization verification, but it's used to verify that you are in fact a culturally specific organization. The prosecutors and legal services applicants have specific documentation that they need to submit as well. They have 3 documents in addition to all the other required documents. Law enforcement has a document, and so does the Domestic Violence Intervention Program. So required documents are available on the Governor's Crime Commission website in the grant information section under grant forms to ensure that you have all of these documents that are required to be submitted with your application or during the modifications process. But each category will have some specific documentation outside of the required documents listed in the RFA. But all of these documents will be in the RFA. All right. Finally, VAWA Stop has a 25% match requirement for state and local government organizations. So this means that the applicant must contribute a 25% portion of the project's total cost, either with their own cash or through in-cash contributions. And Sandy did cover match during an earlier presentation. Please refer back to that and also contact us if you have questions. Applicants will need to complete a match worksheet that details the organization's 25% match contribution, and that worksheet will need to be submitted with the application so that we can review it with your budget. And I want to remind you that all match also has to be allowable to the grant. All right, and we'll move to the next slide. And what we're going to do at this time is transition from VAWA to VOCA with Lindsay Bohan.
Thank you, Dawn. I appreciate it. Yes, so we will get started in reviewing the funding source for our Victims of Crime Act federal funds, or VOCA victim assistance, in regards to what it is actually called, and that is different, of course, from VOCA victims compensation, which is not handled underneath our umbrella agency, GCC. So the goal of VOCA victim assistance funding is overall to improve the treatment of victims of crime by providing victims with the assistance, support, and services necessary to aid their restoration and healing after a criminal act. That is why the legislation was created. And as of last year, VOCA victim assistance funding has been in place for 40 years. So overall, the services under this grant program are defined as those efforts that respond to the emotional and physical needs of crime victims, that assist primary and secondary victims of crime to stabilize their lives after victimization, to assist victims to understand and participate in the criminal justice system, and provide victims of crime with a measure of safety and security as appropriate to their victimization. So these are the primary pieces that all of the agencies who would apply, all of the services that are associated, these are the items that are really going to be what it all is tied back to be able to move forward with the goal of the grant and of VOCA victim assistance funding. We can go to the next one. So similar to VAWA, VOCA also has some mandatory allocations. So GCC is federally mandated to allocate VOCA funding to, at the very minimum, the following items. So a 10% allocation at minimum for sexual assault, additionally a 10% for domestic and family violence, and a 10% for child abuse, as well as 10% for underserved. So these are the definitions of those categories as dictated by the federal government. So these are, and this is 10% of our total award per year has to go into each one of these categories. Go to the next slide. So as far as VOCA requirements overall, the agencies that apply must be able to demonstrate a record of effective services by having a history of providing direct services. So while you do not have to have a history of having VOCA or GCC funding, you do have to have some level of a history of being able to provide these services. Even if it is expanding services or creating a new program, there still has to be some sort of ability to be able to determine that this is an effective an effective program and an effective setup to be able to fund. Agencies must provide documentation of substantial financial support from sources other than the Crime Victims Fund. It is not intended to be the sole funder of any one of the agencies that we work with, even though we know that we are a large or a primary funder for a lot of agencies. So new victim services organizations must show financial capacity with at least 25% of the agency's funding coming from other sources. This may include other federal funds. This also may include state funding, or of course the host of non-federal funding potentials that may be used towards also the match requirement as well. Go to the next slide. So I just wanted to, for a brief moment, just acknowledge, of course, the impact of the funding fluctuations that we've had and the transition that we have had as far as our application cycle over the last few years in particular. So when we looked at those minimum allocations, the 10% that go to domestic violence, sexual assault, and to child abuse, these are allocated under our non-competitive priority or our basic priority. These are domestic violence or sexual assault victim services agencies that are designated only. And then these are child advocacy centers that are designated agencies only in regards to this formula that we determine an allocation for under the non-competitive cycle. Typically, we would also have, and we typically have a competitive cycle. This is usually based on the federal minimum because the underserved 10% is usually taken out of this competitive cycle. And that has been historically what has been done to be able to meet that 10%. But there will be no competitive VOCA priorities this upcoming application cycle as a result of the previous years of the 2024 into 25 as a result of that application cycle, which only did our competitive awards at the time. So the underserved requirement for the funding source has been met at this time, and the underserved grants that were funded and are opening on 10/1/2025 are 3-year grants. So this upcoming application cycle will only be for the designated agencies that are under our VOCA basic grants for domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. Those grants are in the process of or are currently extended until 9/30/2026. So every application, every subrecipient who is a designated agency for and receives a VOCA basic grant should be applying underneath this next cycle and the application cycle that starts in December. I'm going to go to the next one. Again, so as a result, so the non-competitive priorities are the following, of course, priority categories. So we have them split out into our sexual assault and domestic violence victim services and our child advocacy centers. So if you do not receive a notification from GCC establishing that you should receive a basic services funding allocation, then you are not an agency that is eligible to apply for funding in these priority categories this cycle. We, as Caroline noted at the beginning of this workshop, we have had delays in being able to receive our solicitations for 2025 funds. We've also had delays in being able to, we're just later in the year and when we would accept those awards as well. So at this time, we have not sent out the most recent or upcoming basic allocations for our basic grants. However, that will occur. You will receive your allocation in conjunction with the posting of the RFA here in the next month. So once again, as a stressor, all basic grants, all of our VOCA basic grants, all of our non-competitive designated agencies will be applying in this cycle. You should be preparing to apply when December 1st comes and the application is open. We can go to the next. So the priority crosswalk, similar to how Dawn had hers outlined for VAWA. So we will have four different selections for being able to apply for under VOCA for this 2026 application cycle. Typically, we only have two for the basic services agency. Typically, we've had only the domestic violence basic services, domestic violence and sexual assault basic services and the CAC basic services. But this upcoming year, we are going to separate it out into agencies that are only designated for domestic violence, agencies that are only designated for sexual assault, agencies that are dual designated. Typically, all of those agencies would apply under the same priority, but this is going to be separated out so that we can track some of these pieces and parts better. So it's a little bit less confusing for folks when they're moving through the process when it comes to just completing some of the mandatory requirements. So we want to make sure that it's easier for subrecipients to understand when they're completing these items, what category they are falling under and what priority they are falling under. We'll go to the next. And as Dawn also stressed, we want to make sure that everybody is applying under the correct priorities. So again, reviewing the RFA when it is posted, making sure that you're communicating with your planner about what your agency is designated as. And the notifications will also advise that they are domestic violence and sexual assault, that they are just, that they are of what program priority that you are being funded under. So the application submission limits for the non-competitive subrecipients designated for both domestic violence and sexual assault services, again, will submit one application for all the counties served, and unless they have differing implementing agencies for each county. So if you are designated to serve domestic violence and sexual assault for Wake County, say, then you would complete one application for Wake County. If you had another agency that covered a neighboring county, maybe that covered Durham County, but it was under the same subrecipient, that agency would complete a different application because we need it to be a different application for each implementing agency. So subrecipients designated for child abuse services, they will submit one application no matter how many counties served. Again, unless there are differing implementing agencies, because we know we have a couple of umbrella organizations that are the subrecipient, but if there is a differing implementing agency, they need to be under a different application. Sorry, Grace, go ahead and move, you're good. So just to dive a little bit further into each of the funding priorities and what is covered under each of them. So for our sexual assault and domestic violence victim services, again, ours are eligible agencies only, and eligibility is determined and it is communicated to us through the North Carolina Department of Administration, the Division for Women and Youth. This is formerly the Council for Women and Youth Involvement. Of course, they recently transitioned to the name of Division for Youth, for Women and Youth. But they are the agency that advises us as GCC that a domestic violence or a sexual assault agency or a dual agency is eligible for VOCA basic funds. So these proposals are submitted should address the needs of victims of sexual assault or domestic and intimate partner violence by providing direct services to victims of crime in their designated counties. The proposal should include a plan of action to provide the core crisis intervention services to victims. We can go to the next slide. So these core services can include, but are not limited to, of course, items that are listed here: client outreach services, crisis line, language crisis line services, legal assistance, relocation expenses. Certainly, we have a lot of folks who are around shelter and transitional housing services. So this is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some examples of both the direct services and the staff that provide the direct services. And then, of course, the program supplies and operating expenses and so forth that are associated. Within reason, of course, planners have to review all these things, but this is just an example of a list of what would be qualifying. Go to the next slide. So for VOCA funding priority for child abuse is a little bit different. The child advocacy centers are the only agencies that are eligible for the child abuse basic services grants for child abuse. This is determined by the Children's Advocacy Centers of North Carolina, who advise us of both the fully or provisionally accredited CACs for each county, or for, of course, multiple counties in regards to coverage. So they provide us with a list of those agencies every year. And then they also provide us with the allocation based on the amount from VOCA that we've received. So each organization must upload a verification letter from CAC of North Carolina that states their accreditation status. So if it is a new award, even if we have been advised that you are eligible because you are either fully or provisionally accredited, we do have you update and provided that one of the required attachments is a verification letter from the Children's Advocacy Centers of North Carolina to verify that you are accredited. We can go ahead to the next, and just a list of included but not limited to services that proposals may include. Of course, once again, costs that cover direct services personnel and services that are that can be involved in the following. So advocacy, evidence-based mental health services, child medical evaluation, forensic interviews, forensic medical evidence collection exams. Say that 10 times fast. But these are the kinds of direct services and the personnel and supplies associated with these services that would be allowable and should be prioritized under this, under the child abuse basic services priority. Next. So expressly unallowable activities. So a lot of these are really common across most of the funding sources that we have, because of course there are federal rules, but just to go over these. So lobbying and advocacy with respect to legislation or administrative changes to regulations or administrative policy is not an allowable activity to be budgeted underneath the VOCA victim assistance funding source. It's not that your agency can't do those things. It's that you cannot allocate these activities or any costs associated under this funding source. Same as research and studies, except for project evaluation within the limits established by GCC. So there are, program evaluation for your specific grants and some needs-based evaluations of victims that are allowable, but exclusively research and studies that are not aligned with project evaluation are not allowable underneath VOCA victim assistance. Also, active investigation and prosecution of criminal activities, except for the provision of victim assistance services to crime victims, are not allowable as a result of them needing to and having to be paid under different types of funding sources. That is not what VOCA victim assistance is intended to fund, as well as fundraising activities, capital expenses, including capital improvements, property losses and expenses, real estate purchases, mortgage payments, and construction, to name a few. Next. And so a few others that we see pretty consistently that we just want to make sure to reiterate. So the reimbursement of crime victims for expenses incurred because of a crime, except as otherwise allowed by other provisions herein. And that is to designate and differentiate between VOCA victim assistance funds and VOCA victims compensation funds. So we want to make sure that if there are things that are associated with these items, as well as like your medical care and some other pieces and parts, that those expenses are going to the correct funding source, which is partially, of course, what VOCA victims compensation is intended to do as well. So medical care, except as otherwise allowed by other provisions herein. There are some rules around some medical pieces that we are able to cover, but as far as medical care, of course, that is intended to be covered under insurance, other different, other costs that and other funding sources that are not VOCA victim assistance. Salaries and expenses of management, board members, and other administrators, except as specifically allowed elsewhere herein. And so what we see a lot of folks who get placed either partially or in whole on these grants or during the application cycle, and then we have to have them removed or we have to have them more appropriately prorated because this grant or this project is not the sole item that they are working on top of the fact that they potentially could be doing things like prevention work or like fundraising. This is also, Sandy made these points as well, similarly earlier on, that VOCA is not allowed to cover. So we want to make sure that all of these are prorated in, in ways that are allowable and also reasonable for the grant. Additionally, trinkets such as items, hats, the list goes on, regardless of whether they include conference's name or DOJ logo, must not be purchased with DOJ funds. So there's a lot of pieces that people will use during public awareness events or memorial events or outreach that they have to be very specifically tied to providing information about victims' rights. They have to be specifically tied to information about how to provide the community with a better understanding of what services that they provide directly to victims and how victims can get in touch with these programs. So it can't just be, items to give away or items with the logo and stuff like that. So those are typically pretty case by case basis, very much so. But in general, this is the rule. And then also, executive director salary at 100% is never, ever allowable under VOCA victim assistance. Once again, because there are a lot of roles, a lot of pieces and parts of the executive director salary that is not allowable. We also look very closely at if you have your executive director allocated at pretty much anything over 60 to 70% is going to have us do a closer look into what the job duties are. As a result of an understanding of the executive director's full scope of work and what maybe is not appropriate or cannot be allocated to VOCA victim assistance as a result of allowability. Go ahead and move forward. And then last stressor, because we have seen and we are aware that there are, of course, not only are there a lot of federal funds from the Department of Justice and other federal funding sources that are no longer active or agencies are no longer eligible for. We want to just make sure that we outline that, of course, supplanting is also something that we look very highly at. And we have to dig deeper into when we have any sort of questions about previous funding sources or current funding sources when grants are transitioning. So supplanting overall, of course, is the deliberate reduction of state or local government funds otherwise available for victim assistance because of the availability of VOCA funds. So, of course, federal grants are meant to add to existing state and local funds. They are not meant to replace them, or they're not meant to be used in lieu of either state or federal funds that are available. So you would never use federal funds to pay for existing employees unless those existing positions are being backfilled with a new hire. You're never going to use or never should be using federal funds to pay for items or costs that the grantee has already obligated to be paid with state, local, or tribal funds. And then when you're looking at applying to not only new applications, but this also is included in your extensions and your change requests, that includes budget adjustments, you should very much be aware of where these positions are being funded from, where these items are previously being funded from, and how you're making decisions as far as any sort of adjustments, because we've got to stay away from these supplanting concerns as much as possible, obviously, because it's unallowable and against the federal requirements. But we just want to make sure as we're seeing as we're seeing FIPSA grants or as we're seeing other grants and some of the federal ones that can be changed over and can be switched to VOCA funds, but a lot of none of these state, local, or tribal funds can be switched over. We can go to the next one, and I did include some guide sheets and and a link on supplanting if you had any further questions or anything more detailed. And then required documentation for VOCA. So GCC mandated, so agencies applying under the CAC basic program, once again, must have a verification letter from the Child Advocacy Centers of North Carolina. And then it's federally mandated for the use of volunteers for any VOCA funded programs. So if you, for any reason, are unable to have volunteers on your VOCA victim assistance funded program, then you have to submit a request for waiver. And it must include efforts to recruit. It must include like what efforts your agency took to recruit and maintain volunteers, or otherwise demonstrate why circumstances under this project prohibit the use of volunteers. Additionally, VOCA is mandated to serve federal crime victims. So your agency also has to send a letter for the current year that you are applying on your agency's letterhead to your local U.S. attorney, to your local U.S. attorney's office, describing the services that you provide as an agency, and upload a copy of that letter to your attachments. Those are the two things outside of some of the general items that you would make sure to submit for VOCA. Okay, in regards to VOCA match requirements, so overall VOCA grant applications are federally required to include 20% of cash or in-kind match funding for the total cost of the projects. So exceptions to the match requirement are federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, or projects that operate on tribal lands, subrecipients that are territories of the United States, such as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico or the territory of Guam. And then also, if you have an approval of your partial or full match waiver request due to the determination of an agency hardship. So we've had a few questions throughout the course of the chat asking about if the universal waiver is ongoing. So VOCA federally did have a universal match waiver for up to a year after the declaration of the national emergency under COVID. So that ended, and then the year after also ended when that. So I believe as of last year, early last year, could be running together, but I believe that ended. In regards to the universal match waiver, we did provide a unique circumstances waiver for the following application cycle that happened in 2024 into 2025 for our underserved competitive applications. However, at this time, we are proceeding with our typical policy, which does state that you would submit a partial or full match waiver request for our agency to determine agency hardship in being able to submit or meet that match requirement. We are lucky that we have a pretty broad scope of things that there is a pretty broad scope of things that qualify as a hardship. Unfortunately, North Carolina has gone through many of them, especially over the last year and a half, and agencies have been highly impacted, but that does allow us to under our own policy to be able to proceed with waiving hopefully everything that is necessary. We just do have to require the match waiver request form so that we can we can review everybody's circumstances and determine what is qualifying under the hardship requirements. Go to the next one. Okay, so application review, just as a little bit of a differentiation. So VOCA basic grants, so this upcoming grant cycle, VOCA basic grants don't receive scores. They are not reviewed with the rubric like the competitive application cycles are. They certainly are reviewed as far as funding availability, federal minimums, compliance requirements as far as documentation submitted, all the allowability pieces. Your planner still does a modifications review and also looks over your subrecipient profile to ensure that all of these items are complete and they are accurate and they are updated appropriately. And then new non-competitive agencies that we have never funded before, who may have recently become designated through the Department of Administration or through Child Advocacy Centers of North Carolina. We would complete a pre-award risk assessment for those agencies as a federal requirement. But otherwise, if any cuts or adjustments are necessary to these grants, the notifications will be sent out as timely as possible after the allocations have been sent out earlier in the year in regards to or in line with when the RFA is posted. We can move forward. And so there is a few things that Dawn and I are going to go over next that actually apply in overall to the Crime Victim Services team and to our CVS funding sources, both VOCA and VAWA. So first of all, something that Caroline went over and we've gone over a few times in different capacities over the course of the workshop is that, of course, the required documentation under the subrecipient profile is going to be listed in the RFA, both the subrecipient profile required documentation and then also the individual project attachments. They will be they should be included in the application at the time of submission. And when we say included in the application, we don't mean that you have to upload all of your subrecipient profile documents into your application. That thankfully was the purpose of transitioning to the organization doc locker in GEMS and then now into the subrecipient profile tile in EBS, is that you should not be and you should not have to be uploading any of the anything listed under subrecipient profile as organization documents under the application itself. It should only be under the subrecipient profile and updated there. And of course, once again, samples and required forms can be found on the GCC website under grant forms. And then of course, you can access the directory by clicking on the banner above. Again, as I think a few people have noted, we're still working on fleshing out some of the tweaks. So there are some documents that need to be updated and placed in the correct area. But we're working on that, getting that done, and hopefully that will be absolutely completed and good to go by the time we get to the RFA being posted. And then Dawn, did you want to go over the program income?
Sure. So program income. So our crime victim services team strongly discourages claiming program income. It is not totally unallowable, but it is a very, very complex it's complex to deal with program income. Your documentation is going to be very important, and we have to get prior approval as an organization. So program income must be prior approved if it's going to be used. It is very important that you discuss any program activities in detail with the planning team or the planner that you're assigned to ahead of submitting your application. So let's try to talk this through to make sure that you want program income in your application, that we totally understand the intentions and that the documentation that's going to be necessary and any activities you're going to need to take. We want to make sure we understand that up front. So prior approval of any program income is required. We want to stress that because we have had projects that have had some program income and may not have gotten prior approval, maybe due to some misunderstanding. But we want to say at the beginning, we want to talk about program income, make sure it gets in your application correctly if it's going to be used, but it does need prior approval. Program income cannot be claimed unless approval is obtained in writing during the application process. Approval of program income will be assessed on a case-by-case basis, so everyone is different. It's a lot of different programs coming through here, lots of different activities. And then we want you to contact your planner to discuss program income related questions to make sure that you fully understand the requirement and everything that you're going to need to do or not do as it relates to this activity. So all I can stress with program income is pick up the phone, call us, let's make sure we're on the same page. Anything else to add there, Lindsay? You're on mute if you're talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, no, I believe you covered it.
Awesome.
Okay. Do you want to review this one, or I can go ahead and do it. Something that is a little newer for folks that everybody, including planners and grant administrators, are getting used to is really the budget year transition that we are the process that we are completing to go from one year to the next. So the Governor's Crime Commission, well, just as a caveat, as we all know, the Governor's Crime Commission may reduce budgets and request budget adjustments depending on funding availability and other grant activities. That is outlined in every RFA, on every award letter, because of course of the fluctuations that we are seeing in the different changes from year to year and month to month sometimes. But the length of your award, especially for VOCA and VAWA at this point, is we are seeing, and we have a 3-year period of performance. And so the budgets requesting VOCA and VAWA funds are required to reflect 12 months of spending. So all applications are only going to include a year one budget, even as the determination is made that you have been funded for 3 years. You will only be awarded that first year's money. So you will only have that year one budget in place at a time. So your year 2 and your year 3 budgets should align with your year 1 and should be submitted through and will be submitted through the change request process. And that will be outlined more specifically as we move forward, especially with the grant administrators team on their end of the process. But as you've probably noted, we have had we've been in modifications with our new competitive awards where they have placed all 3 years of the budget into their application. And we've advised them that while they absolutely were funded for 3 years, we are only awarding them 1 year at a time. So their budget should only include their year 1 amount. And then, of course, as I said, there will be transitions from the next year to there will be transitions to the year 2 and the year 3. And that's when that amount is determined, which should be close to, but potentially could be less than what you were awarded in year 1. So we just wanted to outline the difference in what that's going to look like, even as your period of performance, like overall, will show a 3-year period of performance. Dawn, was there anything else you'd like to add on that one?
Yep, great. Lindsay, thanks for explaining that. I just wanted to add and make sure everyone understands that each year of funding is subject to funding availability. We want to make sure that you do your very best each year to spend the funds that you've requested, because when you move on to year 2, you want to be on track for spending that year 2. If not, or if anything, you want to make sure that you're communicating with your grant administrator during the period of performance for any delays associated with reimbursements. Again, like Lindsay said, this is going to be new for everyone. So we want to make sure that you start off on a good foot, and we're going to make every effort to be available to you when you need to discuss any questions related to transitioning to each budget year. That's all I had to add, Lindsay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, I don't know where we are as far as time, so apologies if we went over. But this is the contact information in regards to the Crime Victim Services team for our lovely, wonderful team, as well as our supervisor, Donica McAllister, at the bottom. I will once again note, I think what Dawn illustrated again at the beginning is that we receive, as we are in a very busy time at the moment, on top of everything else, and as everybody is as well, we receive a lot of communications, both email, phone, everything, which we absolutely greatly appreciate and want to continue to reach out to us. Customer service is honestly like the highest level priority for us. So we want to make sure that everybody is receiving the communications they need. We do also appreciate everybody's patience and just continued consideration that everybody has been giving us for all of the communication that we have been receiving and trying to get back in a timely fashion. So we are definitely working on ensuring that is always the priority But like I said, we appreciate everybody's patience in this incredibly busy time. We've had multiple subrecipients reach out to us, honestly, just to check in on us, so which we also greatly appreciate, and make sure we're doing okay through all of the fluctuations. So again, that's just as I believe that I can state for the whole team, we really appreciate it. But yeah, so please add your questions in the chat if they haven't already been answered. As was already noted, we'll make sure to get your answers to you as quickly as possible through our FAQs. And then, yeah, just continue to answer as many questions and provide as much assistance as necessary. I think we are good to go, John.
Yeah, thanks everyone.